All right, welcome back. Let's dive into some more ISEE prep. Today, I want to look at strategies and techniques we can apply to the two different verbal sections, verbal reasoning and reading comprehension. So this is actually going to be a brief video. We're just going to look at some common techniques you can use for either of those two sections. And in the next video, I'm going to look specifically at how we deal with sentence completions. So the first thing to recognize is, as far as verbal on the ISEE goes, there are three different question types. You've got your synonyms questions and your sentence completion questions, and both of those come on the verbal reasoning section of the test. These are highly dependent on vocabulary, and I'm going to show you some strategies that will work a little bit if you don't know what the words mean. So there's not nothing that you can do when you don't know what the words mean, but your job is a lot easier when you know what the words mean. So one of the best things you can be doing to prepare for the verbal of the ISEE is studying as much vocabulary as possible. What I typically recommend to students is, just as you're reading, first of all, read some things you might not normally read, particularly things that are a little boring to you, because in all likelihood, these ISEE passages are not going to be super interesting. And so you want to get used to paying attention to things that don't necessarily interest you naturally. Pick up a newspaper article, go online and read something from the New York Times or the Dallas Morning News or whatever your local paper is. Anytime you see a word in that article that you don't know, write that word down and its dictionary definition. When we know a word, typically we think, oh yeah, I just kind of have a sense of what it means. But when we need to know a word on the ISEE, we need to know the dictionary definition of that word. Put those words on flashcards, study those flashcards over time, and that's going to be one of the best ways to expand your vocabulary. Certainly as you're doing any kind of practice sections or practice tests, if you see words you don't know, also be sure to write those down. And then of course we have a whole section dedicated to reading comprehension. This is exactly what it sounds like. It appears on almost every standardized test that there is. You have a passage, you're supposed to read that passage in some sense, and then answer questions about what is the main idea of the passage? What was the author's attitude toward blank? What's the primary purpose of the passage? What did the author mean by blank in lines 31 through 33? These questions obviously don't depend on vocabulary like on the verbal reasoning section, but instead depend on your reading comprehension, your ability to read a text, recall details, identify reasoning and tone and style, and so forth. I'm going to tackle each one of these three question types in a separate video. Again, the next video in this series is going to go over sentence completions. So just know there are strategies we can apply to each of these three question types individually, but this is what you can expect to see as far as the multiple choice verbal of the ISEE. Pacing, just like the test as a whole and just like we've already seen for the quantitative sections, pacing is huge on the ISEE. Verbal reasoning is by far the fastest paced section of the test. You have 40 questions that you're trying to answer in 20 minutes, so you really only have about 30 seconds per question. Now, fortunately, these questions are obviously short. There's really not much to a synonym question. You read the word, you have 4 answer choices. Your job is to pick the answer choice that is most like a synonym to the original word. Sentence completions are similarly short. You have a sentence with 1 or 2 blanks, and then you're going to fill in those 1 or 2 blanks from your answer choices. So although this is the fastest paced section of the test, it's probably in many ways also the easiest section of the test to finish because the questions are so short. Reading comprehension is better in terms of the per question amount of time that you have, but you have to keep in mind that we also have to read the passages. So yes, in a sense, we have 35 minutes for our 36 questions, and we could move at roughly a minute per question, but we also have to find time in there to actually read the passages. Now, when I get to my video on reading comprehension, and it's not recorded yet, but maybe at some point I'll be able to add a card up here and you can just click on that if you want to see the reading comprehension video. One of the things we're going to talk about is how to get through those passages as quickly as possible. You want to be really careful about anything you spend time reading, because anything they don't ask about that we read about is wasted time. So it's not the case that we need to reserve a ton of time for reading the passages, but obviously we need to reserve some non-zero amount of time. And so when you work it out, probably you actually have, once again, between 30 to 45 seconds per question once we incorporate the amount of time that we actually have to spend reading the passages and not just answering questions. And then finally, we have our verbal scratch work. Now, we've already talked a lot about the kinds of things you should be writing down on the quantitative sections of the test, but you might be thinking, well, there are no calculations to do. What on earth am I supposed to write down on the verbal sections of the test? And the answer is a lot more than you think. At minimum, you should be doing good process of elimination right on the test document itself. You do not want to keep your process of elimination in your head. As you come up with an answer for whatever the question is, and you read answer choice A, and it doesn't work, cross it off. Don't just think to yourself, oh, I'm going to remember that I want to get rid of A. Cross off B. You read answer choice C, you like it. keep answer choice C. Put a little arrow there that reminds you, yes, I liked this answer. But especially on these verbal sections, we're always checking all 4 choices. Don't settle on C just because you like it. Go ahead and read D. What should happen now is that we won't like D, and now we can very confidently select answer choice C. Now, if you've taken any kind of practice test before, you probably know this is not what happens every single time. If it is, that's great, you're probably doing really well, but more likely something like this is happening. You read answer choice A, doesn't really fit with whatever it is that you were looking for. You read B, and you don't love it, but you're like, yeah, it's okay, so put a little M there, or a little squiggle next to it. That reminds us, yeah, we like it, but it's not great. And then we'd read C, and it doesn't really fit, so we cross off C, but then we read D, and we really like D. This is why we always keep going. In this case, it's pretty clear, yeah, we didn't really love B in the first place, so we're going to go ahead and select answer choice D. But of course, it's very possible that you would read answer choice D and not like it at all, and in that scenario, we settle on B. Sometimes we're not going to find what we think of as the right answer. Those psychometricians are really good at hiding right answers with deceptive language. And so instead, if we've eliminated 3 choices for good reasons, then even if we don't love what's left over, it must be the right answer. Now, another really common thing that students find, and a reason why we want to visualize our process of elimination, is a scenario we call down to 2. You have an answer in mind, A doesn't fit, B is okay, C is okay, and D doesn't fit. What do we do now? Most of the time that students encounter this, they feel like, wow, I can get it down to 2, but then I pick the wrong answer every time. And first of all, that's overwhelmingly unlikely to be true. If you are successfully getting it down to 2 answer choices where one of them is the right answer, probably you're picking the right answer about half the time and the wrong answer about half the time. The reason it doesn't feel that way is that when we go back and check our work later, nobody ever looks at the questions they get right. They're just happy that they got them right and they move on. They presume, yeah, of course I got that right. I was doing a good job. But then as you look at the questions you got wrong over and over again, you notice, wow, I had it down to 2. And so you reverse that in your mind. You feel like, wow, every time I had it down to 2, I got the wrong answer. And that's just not true. However, even then, we'd like to do a little bit better than just selecting the right answer 50% of the time on these. So in that reading comprehension video, which is where this scenario pops up most often, we will talk about what are some ways we can deal with this down to 2 situation. And then of course we have this whole verbal reasoning section, a big part of which is vocabulary. And sometimes we just don't know what a word means. Never eliminate an answer choice just because you don't know what the word means. Because if I do know what B, C, and D mean, and I know they're not what I'm looking for, then again, just by process of elimination, I can say that it's A. So a big part of our verbal scratch work is just doing good process of elimination, using some common symbols, crossing off choices, noting choices that we really like, noting maybes, and noting words that aren't in our vocabulary yet, so that we're not trying to keep all of that in our head, but that we see it right on the page and it's telling us what to select at the end of the process. There are a few other things you'll want to do in terms of your scratch work. Sometimes you do want to underline different portions of, say, a reading comprehension passage. On sentence completions, we might be jotting our own words down sometimes. For the most part, verbal scratch work is about doing good process of elimination. So there you have it. Again, short video. Those are our global techniques for the verbal reasoning and the reading comprehension sections. We want to be aware of the 3 different question types. We want to be aware of the pacing that those question types require, and we want to make sure we're doing good scratch work even on these non-math sections of the test. Check back in shortly for more ISEE videos. Like and subscribe if this is helpful to you. Be sure to share it with others, and otherwise I'll see y'all next time.